partnership started in 2019. And the intention there is to look at the goals under the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, and how joint implementation can result in co-benefits and more impactful action. So there are a number of streams of work that we do under this topic. We have an annual gathering of policymakers and multi-stakeholder actors who come together to our global Climate and SDG Synergy Conference. We also have a dedicated expert group, the expert group on Climate and SDG Synergies, whose aim is really to look at this topic from the perspective of evidence and try to deepen the evidence and our understanding of what synergies mean. Of course, UN DESA being the custodian of tracking the SDGs and UNFCCC being the sort of the intergovernmental fora for tracking on climate change, we also try to inject the messages around moving away from siloed approaches to integrated solutions in various intergovernmental fora as much as possible. So, for example, at this COP, here we are, this is the SDG Pavilion, and this is where we want to talk about why SDGs matter to climate action and why we need to pursue these sort of global agendas together. So today we have with us a number of distinguished speakers, and we are delighted to have them. We also have members and institutions from the expert group on Climate and SDG Synergies. We have the opportunity to look at the latest findings of the expert group and have a discussion around it. However, without further ado, I would like to invite our keynote speaker for this event, Ms. Isabella Taxiera. She's the member of United Nations High-Level Advisory Board on Economic and Social Affairs. She's also the co-chair of International Resource Panel, and of course, former Minister of Environment of Brazil. Isabella, please, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, welcome to Brazil, welcome to Amazonia, welcome to the, I don't know, greenhouse, okay, probably the real one. But I'm very glad as a Brazilian to welcome you in my country, and it is an important COP that, in my opinion, is absolutely disruptive, and because climate change is happening. We're not anymore discussing climate change in the future, and the importance of this dialogue is so relevant because we're trying to push sustainability in realignment with climate change. I was a panel member of the panel that proposed Sustainable Development Goals. And I remember I was the part of the two panels that you discussed previously, Rio Plus 20, and then after Rio Plus 20 conference, how SDGs should come into the world and consider this new trajectory brings developing and developed countries the same responsibility to drive sustainability. Remember that we have a good experience on development goals and millennium development goals, and we push this to help everyone. And what this was very interesting when you're back in the history is to remember that we have two difficulties, okay, to frame this. The first one was exactly sustainable consumption production. That's absolutely key if you want to have this realignment and synergy between climate and sustainability. It was really we have a really huge barrier to come into this contest. I remember that we have an alliance between Brazil and Germany, okay, to convince the panel members that it would be very important to have these 12 SDGs. And second, you have a really huge debate about if you should or not have climate as one of the SDGs. Okay, I'm just trying back the history to understand after around almost 20 years, the difficulties that we have, the complexity that we have today to drive sustainability in alignment with with climate change. What it means? That climate change, in my understanding today, is a driver that brings nature and climate politics, nature politics and climate politics in the same context of power politics. And as the world changed, this means the complexities that you have today to drive solutions, bring all the countries together, is a reality. It was different that you had 20 years ago. And this is not only because of the cries of the multilateral system, but because the power politics is driving a new world. And you need to understand these movements, and need to understand the role of nature, and need to understand the role of society to come into the new dynamics of economies, and to have another powerful driver coming together with not only climate, but with the power politics. This means the digital and technological world. Today, it's very important to come in a context why the big techs that have the convening power are not coming to support sustainability or sustainable development goals. 10 years ago, we didn't have a carbon removal market. You have it now, okay? Based on this ambition to neutralize emissions and have really big players in private sector into the rooms driving this. Where are the big players that must drive sustainability in alignment with climate crisis? Because we are not only playing based on mitigation, but we are moving to adaptation. And we need all of this to drive solutions when you go to be resilient, less vulnerable, and take risks when you go into business model, for example. So we need to shift our mind and our understanding how to approach things if you come into sustainability and also climate solutions. It's very important also to observe that, as I mentioned here, I'm not discussing biodiversity alone. I'm discussing nature. I repeat this word 3 of the times here. Why? Because nature, indeed, is not only how to play in nature-based solutions. Nature is also driven solutions by itself. And this is very relevant because when you go into economic sectors, for example, food security, agriculture, that we are connecting the dots of the new narrative. We are not discussing anymore, we should not discuss anymore food security based only in agriculture. We need to connect with energy, we need to connect water resource, natural resources, materials. We need to come into this new process of reducing inequality, and part of the inequality that will emerge is exactly based on no access to technologies. So how to connect the dots and be sure that we can have sustainability as the baseline that allow us to really come into NDCs or other tools that to have ambition on climate change, but not necessarily we understand the additional pressure that climate change solutions will put on nature, on environment, and also in social agenda. This is really important and relevant to discuss if you want, and in my understanding, you must want this realignment between climate change and sustainability. So climate change is not only a threat. Climate change is trying to be part of this new equation of the world and to go into power politics and new international order. And this means that we are discussing climate change outside multilateral system, outside our bubble, okay? I mean, it's very important because we have like-minded blocks, like G20, G7, Asian, BRICS Plus, and another one, discussing climate change, but not based, for example, in CBDRs. When you go in the debate of G7 or G20, CBDR is not part of this as a critical issue. And for sustainability, you know how relevant it is, because the Sustainable Development Goals expose us. So these asymmetries that you have when you go to compare the agendas, and you go to compare where we are, where we were, where we must be, this is really tricky politically, and also a big challenge for us that we're running faster and faster and faster, not only because we have 2030, but if we go into 2030, try to discuss what are the commitments based on climate agenda, based on 2030, and how this will link it or not to our ambition of sustainability and sustainable development goals. When you took the decision about 2030, okay, on climate change and Paris Agreement implementation, nobody discussed this. And all the time, we have the same actors into the rooms. There is something different that we need to know and we need to learn, because as the world changed, we have new adults into the room. And my understanding is that we are not enough prepared to come and to provide really a new speech, a new tools to dialogue when you come to discuss the importance of sustainability. Now, why the outcomes, the action agenda is fully dependent on the synergy of sustainable development goals and sustainability. That's why the countries are proposing NDCs without, and also propose a national environment or national biodiversity strategy or biodiversity plan without connecting this. It's like you go into biodiversity, deep into the sustainable development goals, but you forget to connect things that will make sense, that's a powerful narrative to dialogue with climate politics and Asia politics. We are part of the problem, in my understanding, because sometimes we are so comfortable in our bubble that we are coming to say, you're not look at me, yes, but how we are looking at the world today. And my understanding is that we need also to change, okay, with this powerful agenda to reframe our ambition, political ambition, to make sure that we can have some alignments or realignments based on some assumptions that will make sense not only for emerging or vulnerable countries, but for all of them, because this means the business must take care of this. Two last points. It's very important to observe that raw materials, and natural resource will come to play as a bridge to connect the ambition of development and the ambition of power. We cannot go into decarbonization or electrification without understanding the role of nature. We cannot go into climate solutions, another one, land restoration, that without understanding the role of natural resource in nature. We cannot go into power politics, for example, the new defense industry, without understanding this, because I cannot produce any weapon in the world without this. So my feelings is that still we don't understand very well what is happening in this transition process in the world, and you don't understand very well how nature is coming to not only to play, to have a basis for solution, but to driven solutions. And this is sustainability. If you shift the needle for one side, or if you shift the needle for another side, you have really who come to a better balanced approach to sustainability. This is for me very fascinating because it's a new way to frame our priorities, a new way to connect with Paris Agreement tools and make sure that we can do better than we are doing. My last comment exactly based on Paris Agreement. 10 years later, Paris Agreement's here. We have in Brazil 50,000 people that have accreditation in this COP. This is a COP, have a different dynamics. Climate change, as we used to say, when you go into science, politics, etc. This is a long problem issue. Long problem issue means that we need to drive two tracks, politics and governance. I'm absolutely question how the national players or the countries define or build up the governance of sustainability and not necessarily bring the climate governance into the context. It's part of the national reality. The other side of the coin is that as nature changed after the overshoot of 1.5, it's also true that we have a different condition in different contexts of climate change because, as I mentioned, climate change is not something that will happen by the end of the century. This is happening now. This COP is convening a new dynamics of climate politics. It's not only the climate diplomacy that you have, for example, the difficulties when you come to global goal ambition, global goal adaptation, okay, and how some countries try to postpone this is unbelievable. It's a short, it's a narrow-minded when you come to this debate. But also this means that we are trying to push a new context, a new environment to negotiate or to implement based on action agenda or based on implementation of the decision that we're taking by this community in the past. All the action agenda is based on decisions made by countries under the UNFCCC umbrella, okay? And this means that you need to have new adults into the room, private sector and financial sector, society, etc., will come together as non-state members together with members. When you go into sustainability, in our framework of Sustainable Development Goals, the governance is based on the state members. We didn't change yet, okay? And it's very important to observe what's happening here, because from this COP, consider the next one, you have always action agenda as part of the dynamics of climate politics and climate policies. This means that we need to know more what we need to change in the next 5 years, and how we'll come to move beyond 2030, because you have this demand on climate change. By 2050, net zero is from 2050 to 2070, not 2050, because we have India and China from 2006 to 2007. 45% of the global population will be there. How would you like to drive sustainability considering this ambition 2007 in India of low carbon economy? This is a critical question, the realignment, how climate dynamics is really imposing new perspectives for our agenda. So I'd like to remember you that really COP30, if you have this action agenda, I don't know how the chair will pack all the recommendations, et cetera, but this means that we come with business, new business model, we come with new connecting the dots with countries, inside, outside, United Nations system, short-term dynamics, long-term dynamics, because you don't know yet very well, and coming with nature, connecting things to say, if we can do this in short-term perspective, but the cascade effects and impacts in positive and negative perspectives will emerge. So it's a big challenge for our community, as a sustainability community, to drive in the next 5 years, not only what to are not able to reach, but what is our ambition to take in consideration, the critical consideration that nature politics will come together with climate politics. And this means the context of power politics. This means that we have digital age and mining age driving our ambition development, and the new disputes that we have with nature in the core, or environment in the core of the dispute. So I invite you to discuss. I understand that we have industry, understand that we have energy, everything, we can different interests to go into this, but we need to reframe ourselves, our brains, to connect this new interest that we discuss here. We need to connect and coming to understand better the trade-offs and how sustainability could facilitate these trade-offs to play in the right way. If not, we're coming in silos, and it's in Portuguese, and make sure that probably sustainability to be so powerful in the past, we will like trying to dispute place with climate. It's not. We need to come into the top of the process and driving the solutions together with climate solutions. It's a good way, and also driving better climate risks or nature risk and vulnerability, how sustainability really is critical for this. So welcome to the future. I'm waiting for you in the future, okay? Stay always 2 steps ahead, but please don't react based on what you had, okay, or what you have, but try to frame a new way to come with these powerful sustainable development goals to make sure that people understand this very well, and you can have a really new process, build up new process, not based on fear or tragedy, but the capacity of humankind to change because of nature change. Welcome to Brazil again. Don't forget to drink low carbon caipirinha and be happy, and please have a nice debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabella. So insightful. I, for one, can just listen to you for hours. And I wish we had the hours. Really important points in terms of the institutional history of how these agendas were crafted, where we are, and what are the changing contexts, changing dynamics, and the complexities of it all. We hope to be able to take advantage of your knowledge and expertise in the work of the expert group going forward. Now, for this next segment, we will have a discussion around the latest findings of the work that the experts have been doing. And so to do that, I'd like to highlight some of the key findings of the latest reports. This report, the 2025 report, was launched in September, and usually the co-chairs would be presenting this. Unfortunately, because of the logistical issues, they're not able to connect, so I will do the best I can to present you the key findings. So as I mentioned, this is an independent expert group that entails 17 experts from around the world. They have different thematic and geographical backgrounds, and the aim here is to really deepen the evidence base on synergies. What does it mean? Where is it happening? What are some of the barriers? And what are some recommendations for policymakers and others to address those barriers? And I'm delighted to have some of the members with us here today. This work started in 2023, and so far there's been 3 reports. The first one focused on making the case. So why do we need to talk about synergy, and what are some of the examples? The second one, the 2024, looked at specific barriers, so fragmentation, for example, in governance, in policy, in knowledge, and in finance was highlighted as a key barrier in addressing synergies. And this latest one really zooms in on quantified benefits of action. 3 key elements for this report. The first one, as I mentioned, is the quantification of benefits. Together with UNFCCC, we really push the experts on this one because we do believe that for policymakers and practitioners to be able to act on synergies, they need to put a value on it. They need to have a number. They need to have a dollar sign, and hence the quantification exercise. The second element is around key entry points for action, and here I'm very happy that Isabella put so much focus on nature. One of the themes that was the highlight of the 2025 was really the connection between development and nature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And lastly, critical evidence. As we move towards the future, we look into this era of implementation, we look into the future development agenda, building that evidence is going to be critical. This is timely. 3 key points here. First one, of course, we are at this COP of implementation. The NDC 3.0s have come in. The next several years is going to be focused on how we're going to implement these plans. At the same time, we know that the SDGs timeline is also 23. We have less than 5 years to achieve them. And we know that only 18% of the 169 targets of the SDGs are on track. So we're off track on both climate, as you know, as well as the SDGs, and we have very little time to get on the right trajectory. So we want to talk about how can we maximize impact and minimize trade-offs. The second element, investment. Of course, you're all familiar about with finance being one of the major barriers when we talk about achieving the climate goals and the SDGs. We have a number of figures now. We know the SDGs need over 4 trillion of financing to be achieved. On the climate, it's over 600 trillion. We now have climate finance goals, 300 billion. We have the Baku to Berlin roadmap of 1.3 trillion. We know the gap on adaptation financing. So this topic of financing is going to be key, and how can we sort of look at finance in particular and see whether synergies can help close the gap on finance. And lastly, again, this points to as we make the argument, we do need to expand the body of evidence. So it's about accumulating as much evidence as possible to make a convincing argument. There are 9 key messages. I'll go through them very quickly. The first one, it is clear that the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement are intrinsically linked. We have data for that. 80% of the SDG targets are directly linked to climate. And we know that we can no longer afford pursuing these global agendas in isolation with another. The only way to course correct is to look at them from an integrated perspective that will result in greater impact, and that's what we mean by synergies. Second one is about unlocking efficiencies, and this was one of the key findings of this year's report, where the statistical modeling that was done in the report showed that if you pursue climate and development jointly, you can get nearly 40% greater in economic efficiency. So when we talk about finance, this becomes really important in terms of cost saving. The third one, the modeling that was done shows that this sort of exercise is really critical to be able to show quantification. Of course, this particular year's report was focused on public, but we'll see that there's other aspects that are key that we want to focus on in the future reports. Number 4, it's about aligning the national priorities. As you all know, this generation of the NDCs are, in terms of quality, much more improved compared to the previous one. In fact, a lot of them do mention the SDGs, so now it's about how do we make sure the national climate plans are aligned with the national development priorities. The 5th is on adaptation. We all know adaptation and development are two sides of the same coin. However, have we been able to quantify the co-benefits of adaptation? This has not been the focus of this year's report, but it is tagged as a critical issue, and we think that focusing on quantification of adaptation will help advancing the discussions around why we need to invest in adaptation. And the 6th one is about private finance. We all know now the financing gap cannot be achieved by governments alone. Private sector will play a key role, and governments need to be able to leverage private financing to be able to meet their development and climate plans. Again, the contribution of private finance is key, and while it wasn't captured in the analysis this year, it's going to be a focus in the future years. Now, the 7th one is about looking specifically on key entry points. We looked at nature, conservation, and the linkages to development. Statistics there, nature-based solutions could deliver up to 37% of cost-effective CO2 mitigation by 2030, and yet we are very well aware of the financing gap that the world is facing on biodiversity as well as adaptation. On health and cities, the report highlights 4 pathways to deliver major co-benefits in terms of synergistic action vis-a-vis the health sector and cities and local action. This includes cleaner air from fossil fuel, phase out plant-based diets, increasing physical activity, and resilient urban design. And this third piece, quite important as well, focused on insurance. So the report highlighted that 62% of current climate and disaster losses go uninsured. In Africa, that means 0.50% of disasters are only insured. And so a rise of 1% of coverage, insurance coverage, could get us to roughly 6% closer to the SDG achievements. In terms of number of people, that means going from 3 billion to 15 to 25 billion people. So you see the importance of integrating climate and disaster insurance in national priorities and strategies. The 8th recommendation is about, again, the importance of building evidence and using that evidence to guide policymakers as they craft national climate plans, as they craft policies and action to pursue these 2 agendas jointly. And the last one is a little bit more forward-looking, and this is what Isabella mentioned as well. We know the next 5 years are going to be critical on implementation. The SDG timeline is 2030. The NDC, this round of NDCs need to advance in terms of implementation, but we also know that the next several years is an opportunity to look ahead. The process for the 2030 agenda and what will replace the SDGs will start in the next year. And also we know the global stocktake, the next global stocktake under the Paris Agreement will also kick off next couple of years. So these are opportunities to look at the future agendas and how synergies can play a key role. So here's the QR code for the various reports that have been published. Please do check them out. And now we'll have a discussion about all of these findings. So I invite the panelists to please join me on stage. just switching files. It's multitasking here. Thank you so much for joining me on the stage. Let me first introduce our panelists and we'll get into the discussion. To my right here, Mr. Kaveh Gilampour, Vice President for International Strategies, Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. He's also a member of the Climate and SDG Synergies group. We have Mr. Junichi Fujino. He's the Principal Researcher and Program Director from the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. And Junichi has also been leading a lot of things on synergies in Asia Pacific that we look forward to hearing for. I have Ms. Haley Campbell. Welcome, Haley, Director for Care About Climate. And then last but not least, Mr. Satya Tripathi, Secretary General for Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. Thank you so much for being here with us. We have roughly 25 minutes. And so first I wanted to ask, Isabella sort of challenged us to think about this topic and its complexities. I want to ask about your reaction to what Isabella just put in front of us, and vis-a-vis what we know in terms of the past, what we know in terms of where we are, and what we know in terms of what needs to be done moving forward, how we can advance this topic. I'm going to start with Kaveh. I know you have a lot to share, given you're so involved in the negotiations. So Kaveh, over to you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I want to acknowledge the presence of former Minister Teixeira, who was very active in the years running up to the Paris Agreement. So it's really great to see her again here. And of course, she mentioned the complexities. I note that President Lula, in his call for action from Belém, specifically references the importance of SDG and climate synergies, and also with the other conventions. So it's obviously a very high political priority for the COP presidency, and rightly so. I mean, I think the Paris Agreement is a durable process, but what we're seeing is that it's working, but it's not working fast enough. We need to move to transformational levels of action, and how can we do that? And as you said, Bahare, there's plenty of evidence now as a result of the expert group on synergies to show how there's low-hanging fruit that can be captured to accelerate that action. So the question is, why is that not gaining attention? And I'm just going to focus on a few things, given that we are in Belém for COP30, that we could still do in the last days of the COP to make sure that that's done. First of all, I think we need to acknowledge that we should implement the outcomes of the first global stocktake, and the SDG synergies with climate are an important component of that. Secondly, we need to work towards the second global stocktake and make sure that SDG climate synergies are a vital part of that. And there's language that's emerging through the COP presidency consultations that we've had on what has just been announced by the COP30 president will be a decision on the Mutirao, will be a decision coming out of COP30. So the COP presidency has announced that, and there's parties that are trying to ensure that SDG climate synergies are a vital part of that. Former Minister Teixeira also mentioned the action agenda. This is something that has really built up over the years in the context of the UNFCCC, but this presidency has really come forward with a transformational vision of aligning the action agenda with the global stocktake. And the reason why that is important is that it's absolutely critical that the work of the activation groups under that new vision mainstream SDG climate synergies into that work. And then the last thing I would say is that SDG climate synergies are a vital part of a just transition, and that's going to be a very important outcome from COP30, and important that language is in there on that. So while we're looking ahead to the future, I'm looking ahead for the next 5 days and making sure that we say something about SDG climate synergies in the outcome of the COP.
Thank you so much, Kaveh. And we count on your support in the next 5 days. You've already contributed tremendously. Next, I want to go to Haley. Tell us a little bit about Care About Climate, and how does this topic of synergy come in play?
Hi everyone, how are we doing? Really hot, I'm sure. Besides hot, hope we're doing okay after the rest day. Bring some joy into the space. So Yeah, I lead Care About Climate. We're an international nonprofit that is led by women who help train and support young people getting involved in the climate diplomacy spaces. And we do this through a number of ways. The first way, which is really important and connected to the SDGs, is that if we don't know what's happening in our communities or how to make sense of it as it relates not just to climate change but to everything happening around us, access to energy, decent work opportunities, sustainable cities, if we're not all engaged with those conversations but also with the solutions, then we're not going to see the success of the SDGs themselves. So the first thing that we do is an international climate policy and advocacy course, and it's available in 7 languages because language here is all in English mostly. There's some translation, but that's a majority of the world. That's not their first language. And when we're not able to speak to them in their language, how can we expect them to come here, not only understand English, but also understand the language of the negotiations, which I think is a whole separate language on its own. Someone probably studied that somewhere, or they should. But so we do that. It's available in 7 languages, and it trains young people, climate scientists, governments, not just on what happens here, but how do you engage? How do you take what you care about in your community, and how do you bring it into the negotiation so that's really reflective of the needs of the upcoming generations? Because we are the ones that are going to be implementing all of the activities and commitments that we're talking about today for 2035, and the way to get there, that's all on us. These are our jobs. You know, we need jobs. There's rising unemployment around the world. Green, sustainable jobs are the pathway to achieving the SDGs and climate justice all in one. Second is we work on NDCs. We help support young people in understanding their country's climate commitments. 90% of young people around the world actually care about climate change, but only 2 in 10 know what their government is doing to tackle climate change. So part of closing that gap means closing the understanding of how and what our government is doing, and then providing recommendations for how they can do better. So the NDC Equity Tracker has supported 150 young people in analyzing 80 NDCs for gender, ambition, and youth inclusion. And gender, SDG 5 over here, my favorite one, is really important to this because we know that climate change impacts are not gender neutral. We also know that young women and girls have a lot of solutions in their backyard that they've already been doing and that they deserve to be invested in, supported, and trained to be able to support. And so lastly, what I want to note is that, touching on what you said, is the Paris Agreement itself is not what is failing us. It is political will, first and foremost. That's not only failing this process, it's failing the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, which means it's failing our future. Loss and damage, we know, is an injustice. Adaptation is also an injustice. That means that we failed to mitigate emissions quick enough so that everyone who is vulnerable, especially young and future generations, aren't going to be able to care enough about climate change because they're caring so much about having access to energy, having water, having food on the table. These things really affect our ability to engage in climate action long term. So just thinking through the work that we do as a community, but the work that all of us are doing is not, bringing in children, young people, women, is not just a way to say we're doing inclusion. It's because all of our needs are connected to the SDGs. They're also connected to climate. And if we fail to do that, we won't have a just transition. We won't have a good death to the fossil fuel industry, is what I'm calling the just transition, because it's ending, and we want it to end justly. But that's going to take all of us working together, and it's going to take us realizing both climate action is also realizing the SDGs. And so if you want to learn more about what we do with CAC and how we connect it, let me know. But it's really, really important that we're kind of thinking through how all of it is happening in one system.
Thank you, Haley. Not only bringing the energy, but also being very concrete and questioning us and putting us on the spot in terms of we need to be credible when it comes to the future generations. I have 2 girls, and I hope they grow up to be like you. Junichi, over to you. Tell us about the work you're doing in Asia Pacific and Synergies.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I totally agree with you. And then younger generation has more opportunity, and also you have more ability rather than our generation. When we talk with the younger generation, you have a lot of, you learn very fast. And you are here. When I was the same age, I'm just in Japan, and I do my job. And So yeah, my role is that how to make more space. For example, now I work together with the SCAP or ADB or UNEP Asia Pacific office to develop kind of the Asia Pacific synergy report. Because there are a lot of the activities, lot of the good lesson learned, but it's fragmented. So how to collect these kind of lesson learned information into one package to the like a ministerial level, but also we'd like to have open process. So then we'd like to ask anyone to be reviewer. So then like you can be reviewer to the our report and then having a good input into the report itself. But the most important thing is that how to have next actions and how to spread it out the good cases and then how to have a new idea. So yeah, this kind of involvement is quite important. And yeah, like in Japan, now we have another challenge that we try to develop the 100 zero carbon area. So it's by 2030, not 2050. 20 years earlier than 2050, and so I'm acting chair of the evaluation committee on the selecting the 100 cases and also supporting the cases to become zero carbon by 2050. Huge challenges, very tough. But I also want to make a space for the younger generation to work together with this process, not only kind of the joining, but also yeah, you can also tell the story to younger generation. So this is my role. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Junichi. Satya, over to you. Global Alliance for Sustainable Planet. What is it exactly, and how does climate and SDG synergies play a role in the work you do?
Thank you. The Global Alliance is an alliance of 400 organizations. Several UN entities are members, several multilateral organizations, governments, civil society, young champions, and also companies that are firmly on the path to making a meaningful contribution to achieving the climate results and the SDG results, the 169 targets that you talked about. I had a role to play in the formulation of the SDGs 13 years ago, when the high-level panel was set up with three co-chairs, Ellen, Cameron, and President Yudhoyono in Indonesia. I was then leading the UN's Red Plus office called UN ORCID. And my office was asked to backstop President Yudhoyono's leadership in the high-level panel. And so I had an early induction into the SDG. Of course, it's an intergovernmental process, and we at the UN are only supporting the whole process, and that was quite an eye-opener, the entire negotiations and us getting to the 17 goals and understanding that it is the life cycle of not just the humans, but all species. And so from birth to death, poverty affects us, hunger affects us, chemicals affect us, endocrine disruptors affect us, heat affects us, lack of water affects us, pollution affects us, everything. So when people make it a very complicated conversation about 17 SDGs and 169 targets, it is actually the life cycle of us humans and the fabric of life that sustains us on the planet. So that's what the Global Alliance does. I worked very closely with Isabella. She's just left. When I was the Assistant Secretary General at the UN, based in New York, leading the Environment Management Group of the UN that brings everybody together and builds coherence and consistency in what we preach and what we practice as the UN. And since then, of course, I moved to the Global Alliance. Some of the things that we do are, actually all of the things that we do are system scale. Otherwise, our mandate is that we can't get involved in boutique stuff. Not that they are not important, they're absolutely important, but we shouldn't be doing that because we have limited bandwidth, so we must get engaged. Two ideas I'll just mention, and one of them I'm very delighted because the Tropical Forest Forever facility, the precursor to that facility is something that we set up back in 2016 in Indonesia. It's called the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility, which was the world's first private investment at scale in protecting a forest of 400,000 hectares which is 6 times the size of the country Singapore. A successful investment where everybody got paid, nobody lost their shirt as was being projected early on. We took the same, and it employs 50,000 people, achieving pretty much every SDG you can imagine. And then we took the same idea to support a government program, which was a pretty small program in 2017. And then, of course, I moved out and went back to the UN to do my stint as the ASG in New York. But the program continued to grow, and it is now the world's largest sustainable agriculture program. And back in 2017, we did a study. Of course, it was a climate action program, and that, going back to Isabella's point of the information asymmetry between the conversations in different COPs and these G20 and G7 and all the conversations that are happening in silos, it is very simple actually. Now we have gotten to a point that if we don't do climate action, we call it whatever, nature-based solutions, energy transition, we can find our nomenclature for each of these pivot points. There will be no SDGs without us acting on climate, on global warming, on the complete decimation of the fabric of life. So that's why it is so important to do all that. That is only when we will achieve all these SDGs, otherwise not.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have less than 15 minutes. I do want to get through a second round. And this one, I want to focus a little bit on the future. So Kaveh, for you, the next GST, what opportunities does that bring when we talk about synergies between climate action and SDGs? How can we strategize from the next 5 days on to the next GST from your perspective?
Thanks, Bahre. Well, hopefully the outcome from COP30 will put SDG climate synergies right front and center in the outcome. And with that, there's a hook to build on. But essentially, the next GST is going to have to be much more effective than the first one. While we finally have peaked global emissions, apparently, and emissions are set to reduce by around 12 to 13% by 2035, that's far too slow. And also, global impacts are worsening and getting severe in every region of the world. So I think the second GST is going to have to be a very different nature to engage with that reality, but also to engage with people and make sure that the outcomes from the COP process speak to people around the world, what their concerns are, what their priorities are. As we heard here, I don't think the Paris Agreement is the problem, it's the political leadership, and to do that we have to build momentum among stakeholders and constituencies that the leaders respond to, and I think the next global stocktake process can do that.
Thank you so much, Kaveh. Haley, over to you. As we look into the GST, but also the post-2030 global agenda, how can we make sure the voices of the youth are more effectively integrated as opposed to the previous processes?
Yes, so fortunately, this round of the NDC synthesis report actually included children and young people for the first time, and that wasn't by accident. The work that we've been doing for the last 3 years as Care About Climate, but also the children and youth constituency that has existed for well over a decade, and even since the very first convention, there were young people there. People often forget that young people have been part of this process, paving their way, cutting their way, making it so that they can show up here since the very, very beginning. And so we're thinking about the next global stocktake. It's thinking, first of all, what can we do here? One is we do need an NDC response plan that comes out of this COP, because anything that surpasses 1.5, even though we're already probably going to overshoot it, we need to bring it back while we can, is going to be in non-alignment with not only the Sustainable Development Goals, but our rights as young people and future generations who, by the way, were not born when the CCC Convention was even adopted. That little line in there that says future generations, that's us. That's who they're talking about, right? We're here now because the job hasn't been done. And so we're here to take back our future is what I always say. And part of doing that is showing up ready in the next global stocktake with tools like the NDC Equity Tracker, with training, not just by Care About Climate, but other organizations and groups around the world, but also with ensuring that we have stronger connections to the elements of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, like Action for Climate Empowerment, which is poorly represented in the global stock take from last time, that encourages all of us to engage in public participation, awareness raising, access to information, education, and training, such that every single person who is in our communities understands what's going on and can be part of the solutions. Because when we're leaving people, but we're leaving also knowledge out of these rooms, we're leaving solutions off the table that can get us to solve and implement climate solutions a lot more quickly. Because a lot of people in our communities are doing this work. It might not be called climate action, it might not be called adaptation, it might not be called a climate solution, but it is work that goes towards contributing to it. And there has to be a way that we recognize that in the GST and the Action for Climate Empowerment agenda, the work that we do with NDC Equity, all of that is part of that. And so to the last point is we did launch last year the NDC Youth Clause, very exciting. And we had so many governments sign up to actually integrate intergenerational collaboration into their NDCs and make clear commitments. So now it's about how can we work with all of the partners here, all of our adult-led organizations that are our allies, that are our partners, to actually bring us into the fold of policy and technical discussions, not just about children and youth, about the various expertise that we have to offer as we grow in a changing world to contribute to the just transition, to contribute to every single SDG. We're doing that already, but we need to be brought in as experts on those areas, not just as young people that can say, hey, young people, like, how should we include you more? We're here, and there's always room for improvement, but include us as technical experts because we have a lot to offer. And I think, I've asked one young person if they would want to speak here. I bet 200 would raise their hand, right? Because there's so much knowledge they have to offer around the world. Just encouraging us all to see us as experts and bring us into your GST discussions because we're ready. We're doing solutions work and we're ready to contribute and engage. So please, just extend the invite. Otherwise, we might have to bring our own chair, So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and we'll make sure we extend the invite regularly in the future for us as well. Junichi, over to you.
Yeah, of course, I support kind of the Asian friend to develop kind of the Asia-Pacific Synergy report. And then within this COP30 at the ASEAN pavilion, Japanese government promised to work together with the ASEAN Secretariat to organize ASEAN GST. I think this is also quite interesting, the activity to having the local GST because there is a conference of youth or many things, or like a model UN. Why don't you have such a localized kind of the more concrete actions? This is first thing. And also, second thing, there is a next year, July, there is a Commission Environment and Development organized by SCAP. It's every 4-year ministerial level meeting. So all the Asia-Pacific ministers come to Bangkok. And then to receive our report, Asia-Pacific Synergy report. So then we'd like to develop this report, not only evidence-based, but also high-level message or how to show the whole the vision of the Asia-Pacific for next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And then now I commute to the many Japanese local cities. And then I found that some city can develop kinds of local climate action plan. But the next question is that who can operate the energy saving or renewable energy projects? So we need to having such a good human resource training, capacity development. And I hope we can develop more jobs at the local, like you. So younger generation, even in Japan, many younger generation outside the city, they cannot find a good job outside the the center. So how we can have good jobs, like a sustainable jobs at the local level. So these things I would like to continue to support for the next COP beyond.
Thanks, Junichi. The importance of regionalization and localization and getting the voices from the region and local. Satya.
Well, I think we have talked enough. We need to act now. I'm a former UN colleague and I'm alumni, but I really don't see how the Paris Agreement is meaningful, and I'll explain why. Paris Agreement, if fully implemented, is 3.2 degrees of global warming. It's not 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. Then we said, let's put in a 2 degrees as a goal and a 1.5 degree is an ambition, right? We need to accept the truth of what it is. Otherwise, we are in a really bad situation now because we took 1850 to 1900 as the baseline since we started tracking global warming, right? So in 1989, we got 2.5 degrees. In 2017, I'm quoting IPCC data here, not speculative numbers. In 2017, we got to 1 degrees of global warming. 90 years, 27 years. And then, or 28 years. Now, every scientist is telling us that February 2024 is the time when, for the whole year basis, we breached 1.5 degrees. Of course, not on a steady state basis. Yet maybe another 2 years. So even if it is 2027, optimistically speaking, it would have taken us 10 years to get to 1.5 degrees. How much further will it take us to get to 2 degrees? Maybe 8 years? The number is dropping. So we really need to act as fast, as well, and as strongly as we can. And I really want to commend you on the report and the presentation you made that really, and there's a bunch of friends who are there and I respect them a lot because they really care. The Climate-SDG Synergies, I would strongly recommend each one of you read it because it really brings out the very salient points of what is missing in the action package, not in the talk package. The talk package is awesome. You know, we met 30 times. I was there at the first COP in 1995, and Angela Merkel as the president of the COP. It's good, that's a very important process. It's a multilateral process, intergovernmental process. But we really need to see where the synergies are. And we at the Global Alliance have developed a program. Now we have 30 partners, including partners that have $900 billion in their accounts. And it's called GREAT, the Green Economy Accelerator for a Just Transition. The goal is to get 100 million people become climate positive in the next 10 years. We're already at 2 million people. That's the kind of climate action we need to attempt. Will we get to 100 million? I don't care. Even if I get to 10 million, that is still something worth doing, you know? So that's where I think, you know, we really need to focus on the action and bring champions to the forums and to the conversation who can really highlight what's important, and especially young champions, because in the GREAT program, every entrepreneur that is there is a young champion. You will struggle to find these people that are more than 35 years of age. And yesterday, one of them sold $30 million worth of high quality carbon to Mirova by getting to get about 200,000 farmers to transition from synthetic chemical farming to regenerative agriculture. That's the kind of thing that young entrepreneurs are doing across the planet. How do we bring their voices, not just into the conversation, but put the spotlight on them? I think that's extremely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Action now, and let's talking fully on board with that. Colleagues, we have reached the end of our event. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers. This has been an extremely rich conversation. If you are interested in this work of Climate-SDG Synergies, come talk to us. We have a number of opportunities for you to engage, whether it's the work that you're doing, expertise in analytics, evidence, or sort of in terms of participating in different fora related to this topic. Once again, thank you so much, and to be continued.